Hey guys, tonight we're traveling way back to a time when sex in India wasn't whispered behind closed doors or censored out of the textbooks. Nope, it was art. It was science. It was divine. We're diving into a world where physical pleasure wasn't considered dirty or shameful. It was sacred, spiritually significant. Tonight's journey might just blow your mind or make you rethink everything you thought you knew about ancient cultures and intimacy. Let's be honest. You might not survive this. Not in a modern, check your pulse way, but in a how did humanity shift from that openness to this existential spiral kind of way. Before you settle in, take a moment to like this and subscribe if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your city and the time in the comments. I love knowing who's tuning in and from where. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft hum, and let's ease into this journey together. The first thing to grasp is this. In ancient India, sex wasn't just sex. It wasn't only about procreation or pleasure. It was deeply woven into the spiritual, philosophical, and social fabric of the time. If you dive into the Dharma Shastras, those ancient legal and ethical codes, or the Vedas, you'll see that kama, desire or pleasure, was one of the four core goals of human life. Dharma, moral duty; artha, wealth; kama, pleasure; and moksha, liberation. Kama sat at the same table as religious duty and spiritual freedom. Let that sink in. In Western thought, especially modern Judeo-Christian frameworks, pleasure, particularly sexual pleasure, is often viewed with suspicion, as if it's the enemy of discipline or devotion. But in ancient Indian thought, pleasure was a valid, even necessary, part of the journey. Neglecting kama was seen as throwing your life out of balance. This wasn't about hedonism, though. The sages weren't hosting wild orgies in the forest, though we'll get to some spicy bits later. They were saying, experiencing pleasure is a legitimate part of life. Here's where it gets spicier. Sex wasn't just physical. It involved the mind and soul. Intimacy, when approached consciously, could be a form of meditation. Not the candlelit, whale sound vibe we imagine today, but a deeper, transformative practice. That's why temple walls were adorned with erotic carvings, why kings kept the Kama Sutra alongside the Bhagavad Gita, and why scholars wrote about how timing and emotional state affected romantic connection, down to which direction to face for maximum intimacy. Here's a historical tidbit. By around 300 CE, scholars like Vatsyayana were writing detailed manuals on being a good lover, not just physically, but emotionally, socially, and spiritually. Serious business. Here's a quirky fact. During certain festivals in some regions, couples were encouraged to make love outdoors under the stars to honor the union of Shiva and Parvati. Ritualized intimacy as worship. Imagine that on your community calendar next to the farmer's market. But here's the scholarly debate. How widespread were these attitudes? Some argue this openness was limited to elites, Brahmins, royals, the literate few. Others believe even farmers and potters embrace pleasure as part of the cosmic order. Temple carvings aren't just in city shrines. They're in rural India too. Homes were designed with private spaces for intimacy, suggesting this wasn't just elite behavior. It was cultural. Imagine growing up in a world where coming of age wasn't marked by awkward silences, but by thoughtful guidance and pride in pleasure. You wouldn't feel like a pervert for being curious. You'd be stepping into an art form, expected to practice it responsibly and respectfully. Ancient India had its contradictions and repressions, but the baseline was different from today's shame-soaked narratives. This is our foundation. Pleasure, even the steamy kind, was a legitimate part of the human experience, something to explore and honor, not suppress or hide. Let's talk about the Kama Sutra, the book people name drop to sound worldly or spice up a party. Most get wrong. It's not a sex manual, not the way pop culture paints it with acrobatic positions and zero context. It's not porn or ancient 50 Shades. It's a life philosophy disguised as a guide to pleasure. Only one of its 7 parts focuses on sexual technique. The rest covers how to live a balanced, fulfilling life, how to dress, smell nice, throw a good party, even understand the women you meet. Some parts charming, others problematic today. The section on positions is less about bedroom gymnastics and more about mindful pleasure with awareness and control. Vatsana, the Kama Sutra's author, was a celibate monk, not a libertine. His goal was to teach people to live ethically, sensually, and wisely, including how to connect deeply through intimacy. The text emphasizes that women aren't passive recipients of desire. They have preferences, moods, voices. Men were encouraged to listen and let women lead at times. For a text nearly 2,000 years old, that's radical. Fun fact, the Kama Sutra wasn't alone. Texts like the Anangaranga and Radharaja built on these ideas, creating a literary Kama universe. People took this seriously, not for titillation, but as education. Here's a quirky detail. One section advises men on moaning sounds to enhance romance. Ancient Indians knew audio stimulation mattered, but scholars debate how widely the Kama Sutra was read. Was it just for elites lounging in perfumed beds, or a self-help bestseller whispered among friends? Some say its influence was academic. Others believe its ideas seeped into daily life, rituals, and conversations. Colonial powers later sanitized Indian history, erasing sensual elements, but the Kama Sutra wasn't hidden. It was studied, discussed, and honored in libraries. Sex was seen as vital to social harmony. Learn to avoid discord and promote happiness. Imagine growing up where this book wasn't banned but read aloud, where elders handed you a scroll and said, "Study it well. Respect it." That worked better than today's fragmented sex edition. Gender roles and public affection were still rigid, but within the right context, home, temples, festivals, there was space to explore. The Kama Sutra says sex should adapt to the customs and conditions of the time. A flexible idea, far from rigid moral codes. It's not just about sex. It's about being whole, giving equal weight to emotional, sensual, and intellectual needs. Now, let's dive into the divine drama of the gods. In ancient India, gods weren't aloof. They were passionately entangled in cosmic soap operas of love and desire. Take Shiva and Parvati, the ultimate power couple. Shiva, the ascetic yogi, and Parvati, goddess of fertility and devotion, had a union so intense it shook reality. Myths describe their lovemaking lasting centuries, causing cosmic tremors until the gods begged them to tone it down. This wasn't just spicy storytelling. It symbolized the merging of opposites, consciousness and energy, masculine and feminine, a metaphor for spiritual wholeness. Krishna, the playful avatar of Vishnu, had lovers like Radha, their stories drenched in poetry and longing, representing unfulfilled desire and divine yearning. Indra, the king of gods, was famously enthusiastic, once disguising himself to seduce a mortal woman, only to be cursed with 1,000 vaginas, later turned into eyes. These stories weren't locked in temples. They were sung by bards, acted in village plays, painted on home walls. Kids grew up with bedtime tales of gods loving, quarreling, and reconciling, where intimacy was part of the divine order. A quirky fact: some folk traditions say Ganesha was born from Shiva and Parvati's lovemaking sweat, a literal love child of divine energy. Scholars debate whether these tales were metaphorical or racy entertainment. Some see them as spiritual allegories. Others argue they reflect a culture that saw sex as natural, even for gods. These stories taught, entertained, and inspired, showing that even gods struggled with love's complexities. It's comforting to know divine beings fumbled relationships like us, making your 2 a.m. texts seem less cringeworthy. Now, let's explore Tantra, often misunderstood as just tantric sex. Forget the spa menus and 7-hour stereotypes. Tantra, emerging around the 5th to 9th century CE in Hindu and Buddhist traditions, means loom or weaving, blending the physical, spiritual, sensual, and transcendent. It sees life, including sex, as the path to liberation. In some tantric schools, sexual union was literal, a disciplined ritual with mantras, breath control, and visualization, aiming for transformation, not orgasm. It channeled sexual energy to awaken chakras and reach enlightenment. Not all Tantra involves sex. Many paths were celibate. The sensual imagery popularized in the West is a tiny, sensationalized slice. Colonial scholars took racy bits out of context, ignoring Tantra's depth. A fringe fact: some tantric rituals occurred in cremation grounds, using taboo settings like skulls to confront fear and reclaim power. Scholars debate how widespread these practices were, secretive sects or broader communities. The truth is layered. Tantra saw the body and senses as gateways, not obstacles, flipping the script. Know the body deeply to rise beyond it. Imagine a world where urges aren't shameful but guided, where lovemaking could be sacred, timeless, and ego-dissolving. Tantra demanded control and devotion, not indulgence, a risky, high-wire act. Its legacy, from chakras to kundalini, influences modern spirituality, but its deeper message, every experience, including sex, is sacred, often gets lost. Picture walking barefoot through a temple courtyard, the stone warm underfoot, walls covered in erotic carvings. These temples, like Khajuraho, built by the Chandala dynasty, 950 to 1050 CE, weren't brothels but cosmic maps. The outer walls, adorned with lovers in embrace, represent Kama, desire, while the inner sanctum symbolizes moksha, liberation. You pass through desire to reach the divine. These carvings were also educational, visual Kama Sutras teaching balance and reverence for the illiterate. A quirky fact: one carving at Konark Sun Temple shows a couple mid-act with a peacock watching, head cocked like a nosy Annie. Scholars debate their purpose: moral lessons, ritual depictions, tantric symbols, or fertility imagery. They're too intentional to be mere decoration, proclaiming that ecstasy is sacred, love in all forms part of transcendence. Colonial scholars called them obscene, erasing their spiritual depth, but the stone still hums with a civilization that saw sex as holy. Now, imagine an ancient Indian home, 300 BCE, a mud brick courtyard under a neem tree. Intimacy happened here, not in temples or manuals, but in quiet moments behind cotton curtains. Sex was part of life's rhythm, encouraged for health and connection, timed with lunar cycles or seasons. Full moons were favored. Tuesdays and Saturdays, not so much. Couples prayed to Kamadeva, the love god with flower-tipped arrows, for romantic harmony. Privacy was rare in extended family homes, so intimacy unfolded late at night or pre-dawn, maybe with sandalwood oil and betel leaves for sweet breath. A sensual ritual. Love advisors, older women or courtesans, offered tips and aphrodisiacs. Scholars debate if open attitudes reached all classes or stayed elite, but folk songs with cheeky metaphors suggest a relaxed view of sexuality across society. In that courtyard, intimacy was a gentle dance, not performance, echoing through lifetimes in a culture of reincarnation. How do people learn about sex? Not through awkward slideshows, but through stories, songs, and frank anties. The Kama Sutra tradition, including the Kama Sutra, taught courtship, conversation, and bedroom skills as life skills. Women learned too, through matriarchs or courtesans. Education was holistic, emotional dynamics, hygiene, even how someone's walk or favorite color revealed their personality. A quirky fact: text suggested a swan-like gait and pale fabrics meant a gentle lover. Scholars debate if this was for elites or spread orally through folk traditions. Gurus in tantric or bhakti traditions taught lovemaking as yoga, a union of souls. Courtesans, trained in poetry and charm, were master educators. Knowledge wasn't shameful, but part of adult life, like cooking or sweeping. In ancient India, desire wasn't hidden. It was a sacred thread in life's weave, guiding you to be whole, breath by breath, touch by touch. Sex deserved respect and, above all, to be taught, not buried under embarrassment. As your mind drifts between dream and memory, imagine learning about pleasure from someone who cared, who saw it as their duty to teach you to love well, touch gently, and embrace desire without fear. Picture a world where that wasn't awkward but natural. Maybe those whispering banyan trees and sandalwood-scented lessons linger in your memory, waiting to resurface. Now let's shift to something less seductive but more complex: rules. For all its sensual celebration, ancient India had a structured view of who could have sex, when, how, and with whom. It might sound like a buzzkill, but it's nuanced. Pleasure was sacred, but it demanded a well-rehearsed ritual, precise, respectful, and tied to your place in the social order. First stage: people married young, but sexual relations often waited until physical maturity. Texts like the Manusmriti outline timelines. Boys completed their celibate student phase, brahmacharya, before marriage, which could mean years of study and rituals. Girls typically married after puberty, though practices varied, and consummation was sometimes delayed, especially among royalty. Caste shaped the rules too. Higher castes, like Brahmins, faced stricter regulations, marrying within their varna and timing intimacy around religious or astrological taboos. Lower castes often had looser customs, not necessarily more freedom, just different expectations. Gender roles were rigid. Men had more leeway, especially in polygamous households, while women's sexuality was tied to marriage, fertility, and social stability. Yet, many texts acknowledged female desire, even if framed by duty. Menstruation was a key factor. Women abstained during their period, often retreating for rest or spiritual focus, seen not as impure, but as a powerful inward time. Sex during menstruation was almost always off-limits. Here's a historical gem. Texts like the Anangaranga recommended specific sexual position for different days or seasons. Fridays under a spring full moon were ideal, Tuesdays less so. They believed mood, health, and temperament aligned with the cosmic clock, even suggesting days for conceiving boys or girls. A quirky fact: if you had sex at an inauspicious time, like during an eclipse, you'd perform purification rituals. Think cold baths, mantras, and milk offerings to the gods to fix the cosmic whoops. Scholars debate how strictly these rules were followed. Some say daily survival trumped astrological precision for most. Others argue they deeply shaped behavior, especially among elites where honor and ritual purity were paramount. Sex wasn't a free-for-all. It was a dance of freedom and restriction, pleasure and propriety. Yet, these rules often acknowledged pleasure, explaining why certain days were avoided for spiritual or energetic reasons. It wasn't don't enjoy, but enjoy wisely. Consent, while not modern, enthusiastic consent, was addressed. The Kama Sutra warns against pressuring a partner, emphasizing gradual seduction and attentiveness. If a partner seemed disinterested, the act paused, a progressive notion for its time. Imagine a couple, fresh from a festival, incense clinging to their clothes, checking the lunar calendar, their diets, and the day of the week before deciding if tonight's the night. This mindful rhythm tied sexuality to nature and time, curating pleasure with intention. Not everyone had this luxury. Courtesans, widows, and servants navigated a different landscape, sometimes more flexible, often exploitative, balancing survival and subtle rebellion. Their stories come later. For now, imagine a world where desire waited for the right moon, hour, breath, where intimacy wasn't rushed but ritually invited. There's a calm in that, a reminder that timing can be sacred, waiting part of the magic, and pleasure, when welcomed with care, has its own divine rhythm. Now let's explore a fluid, complex space: gender. While modern conversations often frame gender as a rigid binary, ancient India was ahead of the curve, recognizing identities beyond male and female long before terms like non-binary existed. Enter the Hijras, a diverse community assigned male at birth, but identifying as female, non-binary, or in between. In ancient times, Hijras weren't just tolerated. They were often revered, holding roles as musicians, dancers, spiritual guides, and sexual beings in royal courts and temple ceremonies. A historical gem. During the Mughal Empire, Hijras, then called Khajuraho, served as advisors, guards, and confidants in royal harems, their non-binary status seen as uniquely trustworthy. Earlier Vedic and Sanskrit texts mention gender-diverse individuals, giving them names, stories, and divine lineage. Take Ardnarishvara, the composite deity of half Shiva, half Parvati, one side male, one side female, a holy symbol of gender unity, not weirdness but balance. A quirky fact, some Sanskrit medical texts describe a third nature beyond male or female. While not always flattering, they acknowledge gender diversity. The Kama Sutra discusses male-male intimacy, describing kliba, men who preferred men or defied conventional masculinity, with the same neutral tone as heterosexual couples, even offering tips. How this played out daily is debated. Some scholars say non-binary or queer individuals were accepted only in ritual contexts, like festivals, but marginalized elsewhere. Others argue gender fluidity was woven into rural and urban life, with hijras living communally, blessing weddings, and performing fertility rituals. The Mahabharata features gender-fluid characters like Shikhandi or Arjuna's brief transformation, though texts sometimes treat these as divine anomalies. With a sacred or taboo, it depends on the source. Hijras form tight-knit communities, some practicing tantra, others engaging in sex work due to exclusion, not identity. Relationships varied. Some had romantic partners, others rejected intimacy for spiritual focus, reflecting the full spectrum of human love. Imagine a village in 600 CE. Drums beat as a hijra procession passes, children giggle, women offer rice flour. No one's debating chromosomes, just celebrating their presence. Inclusion wasn't perfect, with prejudices and limits, but there was space in myth, ritual, and society. As you settle under your blanket, consider a world where gods blurred gender lines, dancers rewrote roles, and being in between was sometimes the point. Now, something surprising, same-sex desire. It wasn't a hidden subculture, but acknowledged in literature, art, and mythology. Hindu myths don't shy away from queer love. In the Mahabharata, Krishna transforms into his female form, Mohini, to marry Aravan, a warrior facing death, spending one night together before Krishna mourns as his widow. This story is honored today at Tamil Nadu's Kuvagam festival, where transgender and non-binary people reenact the wedding, blending devotion and identity. The Kama Sutra dedicates a section to male-male love, describing kliba or sanda with practical advice, not shame. Sanskrit and Tamil poetry hint at same-sex longing, women dreaming of another's touch, warriors sharing bonds beyond battle. A quirky fact, some regions honored friendship marriages between women, involving garlands and vows, suggesting deep, possibly romantic bonds. Was ancient India a queer utopia? No. Social roles and caste created tension, and texts varied from curious to dismissive. But same-sex desire was named and seen. Scholars debate how normalized this was. Some say texts overstated acceptance. Others argue pre-colonial India was fluid compared to the shame imposed by British laws like Section 377, which criminalized unnatural acts until 2018. Colonialism erased centuries of tradition. Picture two young men under a banyan tree, holding hands, quoting love poems, or two women braiding hair by lamplight, their bond unquestioned. Queer love wasn't new. It was ancient, divine, quietly blessed. Now, the tension point, celibacy, the sacred art of saying no to sex. In many traditions, brahmacharya wasn't about shame, but a power move, redirecting desire into mental clarity and spiritual growth. Yogis believed preserving sexual energy could unlock heightened perception or even levitation. Celibacy was practiced by students, warriors, and married couples, seasonally, situationally, or permanently. A historical fact, in Jain and Buddhist sects, even a lustful dream required public confession. Imagine admitting a vivid mango seller dream to your monk peers. The Buddha resisted Mara's seductive daughters, a mythic image of restraint. A quirky fact, some ascetics plucked all body hair, fearing even a sensation could spark arousal. Yet, stories like sage Vishvamitra's seduction by Apsara Menaka show desire as a test, not a sin. Scholars debate whether these tales warn against temptation or acknowledge its humanity. Some tantric schools sublimated desire through breath and meditation, not rejection, while women sometimes chose celibacy to escape marriage, a quiet rebellion. Celibacy and pleasure coexisted. You weren't locked into one path, but taught to understand both. Restraint was mastery, not absence, of desire. Imagine monks on a silent forest path, letting a flare of longing pass like a breeze, finding pleasure in the soul's pause. Now, into the royal palace, where sensuality met power. Kings and queens didn't just read the Kama Sutra. They commissioned gold-leaf copies. Sexuality was political. Marriage alliances, heirs, and a king's bedroom prowess signaled his rule strength. Courtesans, highly educated in music, poetry, and flirtation, were cultural tastemakers, advisors, even spies. A historical fact: in cities like Ujjain, courtesan houses stood near temples, supported by royalty. Amrapali, a famous courtesan, was courted by kings and later became a nun. A quirky fact: Gupta kings held lover competitions in pleasure gardens with sensual art and pavilions. Queen's sexuality was tied to the kingdom's fertility. Her joy ensured prosperity. But the palace was brutal. Women were pawns. Courtesans lacked protections. Yet, moments of intimacy, coded letters, moonlit trysts, flourished. Manuals stressed ethics. A ruler ignoring his partner's desires was weak. Pleasure required skill and generosity. Picture a marble room, jasmine-scented, where a king in silk and a queen in laughter connect, not out of duty, but desire. Intimacy was diplomacy, pleasure a legacy. Finally, Ayurveda, India's ancient medicine system, saw sex as rejuvenation, balancing the dashas Vata, Pitta, Kapha. Too much sex depleted ajas, life essence. Too little caused stagnation. Texts like the Charaka Samhita detailed timing, frequency, and posture, favoring calm, rested nights. A historical fact: its Vajrayana chapter lists aphrodisiac recipes with ghee, honey, and gold leaf for clarity and harmony. A quirky fact: chewing betel leaves was a poetic prelude to intimacy, sweetening breath and mood. Imagine a world where sex is a crafted dance, timed with the moon, guided by wisdom, and woven into life's sacred rhythm, where desire and spirit are partners, not enemies. Some Ayurvedic scholars believe that making love while facing east could enhance memory and intelligence. West could boost creativity, and north could foster spiritual growth. South? Avoid it, considered bad for health. Imagine arranging your bedroom for chakra alignment and sunrise orientation. Cosmic feng shui. Ayurveda went beyond tips and tonics, emphasizing emotional compatibility. A healthy sex life wasn't just about the act, but connection. Resentment, anxiety, or power imbalances could cause physical issues like digestive problems, skin conditions, or chronic fatigue. Ancient physicians knew breakups could make you break out long before modern wellness trends. Scholars debate how widely Ayurveda's teachings spread. Some say they were elite, practiced by trained physicians for the wealthy, with little impact on common folk. Others argue its principles, especially around sexual wellness, reached everyday people through folk medicine, midwives, temple healers, and oral traditions. Aphrodisiacs like ashwagandha, shatavari, and honey were accessible and easy to prepare. No palace pantry required. Still, Ayurveda had biases. It leaned male-centric, framing women's pleasure around fertility and family harmony. Texts described women's temperaments by dasha, often unflatteringly for kapha types. Yet, they insisted women deserved relaxation, nourishment, and emotional connection before sex, revolutionary for its time. Ayurveda warned against sex during indigestion, after heavy exercise, or when drunk, angry, or sad. Intimacy demanded precision. Like surgery, preparation and mental state mattered. Ignore the rules, and you might face a rash or insomnia. Picture a village couple under a neem tree, sipping saffron-laced milk, the man fresh from an oil massage, the woman's hair braided, resin burning to clear the air. Their meal is light, their laughter easy. They face east, their act unhurried, almost meditative. Sex here isn't just physical, It's medicine, healing, a sharing of strength and prana. Modern wellness influencers echo what Ayurveda mastered. When balanced and slow, sex is nourishment, a reminder you're alive and connected. Now, step into the monsoon, not just a season, but a sensual mood. When rain softened the earth, the scent of wet soil and jasmine filled the air, signaling fertility and passion. Monsoon was life-giving. Crops grew, rivers swelled, and couples were encouraged to conceive, believing monsoon-born children would be healthier or spiritually gifted. Sanskrit poetry, like Kalidasa's Meghaduta, captures this, with a lovelorn yaksha lamenting separation from his wife amid thunder and lush forests. Monsoon was a sensual awakening, its storms a call to love. A historical fact: rural monsoon festivals tied fertility rituals to offerings for rain god Indra and love god Kamadeva. Women danced barefoot, men played drums, and some swung on mango tree swings, singing love songs to invite rain and future husbands. A quirky fact: Ayurveda discouraged sex in summer's heat but greenlit it during monsoon to balance dashas, replenish ajas, and strengthen bonds. Scholars debate if this eroticism was poetic or practical. Some say it was literary. Others insist it permeated agricultural life, where seasonal cycles govern all. Monsoon symbolized emotional openness, a softening after summer stoicism, allowing tears, love letters, and touch. Imagine a couple by a window, rain pouring, their hands finding each other after weeks apart. Desire returns, not summoned but carried by the season's rhythm, a soft magic tying the body to the land's heartbeat. Monsoon-inspired art. Temple dancers performed rain-soaked ragas, painters depicted Radha and Krishna entwined under stormy skies. Close your eyes and feel the monsoon's permission to reconnect. Its thunder slowing your breath, its wet earth filling your chest. Your ancestors responded to rain with open arms, and maybe you do too. Now, the visual language of seduction. Clothing as foreplay. In ancient India, dress was a flirtatious code. Saris, dhotis, and turbans, all unstitched, could be unwrapped with flair. A slipping palu or bared shoulder was as intimate as poetry. Temple sculptures show women in sheer, low-tide garments, midriffs exposed, not scandalous but elegant, the belly eroticized for fertility and sensuality. A historical fact: fine muslins, called woven air, could pass through a ring, luring through suggestion. Hair, oiled and loose, signaled readiness in private, adorned with jasmine or sandalwood paste. Men oiled their chests, wore jewels, and walked with graceful confidence, as the Kama Sutra advised. A quirky fact: some couples swapped garments post-intimacy, a gesture of trust, like sharing an oversized hoodie but with silks. Scholars debate if temple carvings reflected daily attire or idealized aesthetics. Laborers wore less than priests, but context shaped modesty. Nudity wasn't inherently sexual. Jain monks went unclothed for spiritual detachment, though the body's power remained. Seduction was subtle: a glance, a flick of the wrist, a foot peeking from sari. Undressing was ritualized, with oils and poetry, removing barriers, not just cloth. Picture a woman in a translucent sari, silver bells on her ankles, her gaze deepened with kohl, or a man, vetiver-scented, waiting nervously. Clothes spoke before words, suggestion outshining display. Now, marriage, not the romantic ideal, but a duty-driven institution for alliances, caste purity, and karma. Love often came later, if at all. Yet, sex within marriage was expected, even required. Texts like the Dharmashastra and Griya Sutras outlined conjugal duties. Neglecting a wife's needs misaligned a husband with dharma, while wives had rights to satisfaction. A historical fact: the Arthashastra stresses that kings must attend to queen's bedroom, needs to avoid palace unrest. Patriarchy dominated, but reciprocity was discussed. Wedding nights, *Ratri Bhojana*, weren't always immediate. Consummation could wait, eased by rituals, shared meals, and games. A quirky fact: older female relatives coached brides on pleasure and relaxation, passing wisdom like a recipe. Not all marriages were consensual or gentle. Some were oppressive, but dynamics varied. The Kama Sutra urged husbands to heed wives' moods, offering advice on rekindling interest or apologizing. Polyandry existed in Himalayan regions for practical reasons, while polygamy was common among kings. Sex in marriage was a bridge to harmony, a sacred act of connection. Imagine a couple after prayers, lamps low, reaching out in quiet familiarity. Marriage wasn't perfection but balance. Sex not fireworks but healing. Now, the forbidden, illicit love, defying rules with stolen glances and moonlit trysts. Literature like the Kathasarit Sagar tells of lovers crossing caste and class. A Brahmin's wife sneaking out with a dancer, her punishment swift but her passion unjudged. A historical fact. Law codes find adultery, but texts showed empathy for neglected wives, even suggesting spiritual grounds for leaving. A quirky fact. Love manuals warned affair-doers to avoid leaving jewelry or hairpins. Ancient advice to cover tracks. Radha and Krishna's illicit love, though divine, is a metaphor for spiritual longing, their rule-breaking potency celebrated. Scholars debate if such leniency was real or literary. Affairs fascinated all classes, with women initiating secret romances via coded songs or symbols like a red-dyed banana leaf. Not all were romantic. Some involved coercion or survival, but desire's complexity was acknowledged. Picture a village woman meeting a bard by a well, their hour under rain-soaked skies, cracking open routine. Forbidden love carried costs but burned bright, reminding us of hearts that leap fences and live in shadows. Finally, pregnancy and contraception. Children were sacred, sons prized for lineage, daughters loved but transient. Yet, not every union aimed for procreation. Ayurveda timed conception with moon phases and directions for desired traits. The Charaka Samhita detailed fertility, miscarriage, and contraception using herbal pessaries of neem, honey, or ghee. A quirky fact, neem oil's spermicidal properties, noted 2,000 years ago, have modern backing. Pregnancy rituals involve chants, massages, and mood care, believing the mother's experiences shaped the child's soul. Abortion, *Garbhapatana*, was rare, discouraged, but allowed if the mother's life was at risk. Scholars debate contraception's prevalence, used by courtesans or wives alike. Women whispered secrets, grinding herbs at night, while men were advised to avoid sex when depleted to ensure strong offspring. Picture a young wife receiving neem paste from her mother-in-law, or a courtesan mixing tonics. Their choice is quiet but powerful. Sex was generative, managed with mindfulness, its consequences woven into life's rhythm. Now, sex work, a nuanced world beyond prostitute. Ganikas were courtesans trained in poetry, music, and seduction, not just lovers but intellectuals and spies. A historical fact, the Arthashastra regulated Ganikas, detailing their training in the 64 arts, including chess and storytelling. Amrapali, a celebrated Ganika, charmed kings and became a Buddhist nun. Devadasis, temple dancers, blended spirituality and sensuality, though their roles later blurred into exploitation. A quirky fact, courtesans were seen as healers, restoring men's vitality through touch and conversation. Not all sex workers were empowered. Street workers faced marginalization, and even Ganikas lost status with age. Scholars debate their autonomy. Some say they had more freedom than wives, others highlight coercive training. Texts celebrated them as divine, yet called them distractions. Picture a Ganika in Ujjain, singing Kalidasa to a merchant, or a Devadasi dancing for a deity, her anklets chiming. Sex work was holy and worldly, raising temples while navigating shadows, a testament to ancient India's complex dance of desire and divinity. Courtesans toppled reputations, taught pleasure and poetry, and linger in memory's candlelit rooms, half in shadow, half in moonlight. Their lives remind us that sexuality was art, survival, power, and deeply human. Now, step into the library of imagination, where worn scrolls and frayed verses hold ancient India's bookshelf of erotic literature. Not just the Kama Sutra, but a genre of romance and sensuality crafted by scholars, poets, physicians, and dreamers who saw desire as life's story, not a footnote. The Kama Sutra was part of the Kama Sutra, the science of desire, exploring attraction, behavior, mood, and aesthetics, down to bedsheet arrangements and seasonal flowers. The Radha Secrets of Love, written by Kikoka in the 11th century, is a romantic guide, categorizing personalities and sensual preferences, detailing ideal times, settings, think flowers and moonlight, and subtle cues like body language. Less acrobatics, more emotional intelligence. The Anangaranga, Stage of the Bodiless One, from the 15th century, took a devotional approach, treating sex as a divine act, emphasizing foreplay, mutual satisfaction, and positions for compatibility, not novelty. It valued women's pleasure, a bold stance for its era. A historical fact, these texts blended technical instruction with lyrical metaphors, like arousal as a lotus trembling before the rising sun, or climax as a peacock's cry before rain. They weren't dry manuals, but immersive art. A quirky fact, erotic riddles, short poems with slide double meanings, were recited during courtship or royal gatherings to signal interest subtly. Ancient flirtation via poetry and rosewater. Sanskrit dramas like Kalidasa's Shakuntala wove sensual subplots with longing glances and lingering sighs, slow burns predating modern romance. Scholars debate their use. Were they elite luxuries, oral tales, or self-help for routine marriages? Likely all three. Some texts even reference same-sex relationships and fluid gender roles, hinting at a broad imagination. Picture a scholar in a lamplit chamber, inking Sanskrit on palm leaves for lovers, or a bride finding comfort in a scroll's words, naming her feelings as human, not wrong. These texts weren't shameful. They were treasured, annotated with notes like "try this with honey." Now, the menagerie of animal symbolism, where creatures embodied desire. Peacocks, with shimmering feathers, symbolized seductive charm, their rain-induced displays mirroring male arousal. Krishna's peacock feather crown tied beauty to divine romance. In temple carvings, peacocks hover near lovers, signaling passion. Snakes, Naga, represented Kundalini energy, coiling at the spine's base, awakened through meditation or sex for enlightenment. Not temptation, but sacred potential. A historical fact, Tantric art showed snakes with flared hoods behind women, symbolizing erotic energy and protection. Couples prayed to snake deities like Manasa for fertility. A quirky fact, South Indian newlyweds received snake charms under pillows to enhance Kundalini and ease shyness. Elephants symbolized masculine strength and endurance. The Kama Sutra classified men as elephant types, paired with lotus-like women. Scholars debate if these were poetic or coded anatomy lessons. In poetry, women's glances were deer-like, movements monkey-playful, voices dove-soft. Men were roaring lions or persistent bees. Erotic dreams with tigers or swans signal passion or romance. Picture a temple carving, lovers entwined, an elephant watching, a snake slithering, a peacock above, humans echoing nature's rhythm. Now, the strange shelf of tantric tools and potions. Vajakarana dravyas, aphrodisiacs, included banyan bark, goat testicles and ghee, crushed pearls, and gold leaf for solar vitality. The Charaka Samhita devoted chapters to potions for desire, performance, or recovery, used by kings, warriors, even monks redirecting energy. Oils infused with jasmine or sandalwood awaken prana, tailored to dashas. A quirky fact, the Anangaranga suggests lip paste for unbearable sweetness, in kissing or betel leaves dried under moonlight for tingling euphoria. Tools included stone or ivory phalluses used by courtesans or celibate women, mentioned in poems as stone lovers. Tantric rituals used linga and yoni symbols, blending meditation and pleasure. Amulets with yantras or mantras enhanced desire or attracted lovers. One spell involved rose oil-soaked threads tied around wrists. Scholars debate their reach, elite or village-made. Psychological tools like play acting or teasing added rasa, flavor. Picture a palace chamber with clay pots of oils, an open book of poetry, and lovers tracing mantras on skin. No rush, just ritual. Pleasure was science, story, and superstition, amplified by intention. Then, the decline of open sexuality. For over a millennium, Kama was a pillar of life, etched in temples and verse. But from the late first millennium, Islamic invasions brought conservative codes. Some rulers appreciated sensuality, but temples were sacked, erotic art defaced, and Ganikas lost support. Hindu Bhakti movements reframed desire as symbolic, not sensual. A historical fact. In 11th to 12th centuries, temple dancers faced bans, and Kama Sutra readings went underground. Colonialism, especially British rule, cemented shame. Victorian morality labeled temples obscene, hiding carvings and sanitizing stories. A quirky fact. Sir Richard Burton's 1864 Kama Sutra translation was printed secretly, disguised as scholarship. Section 377, 1860, criminalized non-heteronormative sex, silencing queer traditions. Devadasis were branded prostitutes, their dances outlawed. Erotic texts were deemed pornographic, and homes were raided for obscene literature. Post-independence, leaders like Gandhi emphasized celibacy, cementing colonial shame. Imagine a 1950s child asking about temple lovers, told they're just dancing, the truth buried. Scholars debate if conservatism was native or imposed, but the erasure was real. Yet artists and historians are reviving lost verses, dances, and dignity, unearthing India's poetic roots. In modern India, the pulse of Kama stirs. In cities, poets recite verses of longing. Instagram reinterprets the Kama Sutra, and museums display erotic art. The 2018 repeal of Section 377 cited ancient texts celebrating diverse love, healing history. A historical fact. The Supreme Court recognized love as a constitutional right, rooted in Hindu and Buddhist traditions. A quirky fact. The 2020's Erotic Epics Project archives tantric manuals and oral histories, reclaiming desire's narrative. Rural India keeps erotic folk art alive on wedding cards and temple offerings to Radha and Krishna. Yet, tension persists, moral policing, censored films, and backlash against open desire. Ancient India saw sex as powerful, not dirty, a truth now reawakening. Imagine a classroom where a 1,200-year-old love poem feels familiar, or a queer teen finding solace in ancient carvings. Kama isn't dead, it's learning to speak. As you rest, know your desire continues a lineage predating shame. The body isn't a cage, but a doorway. The question isn't whether sex was sacred, but how to make it sacred again. The story lives in every remembered whisper, carved stone, and beating heart. Dim the light, let ancient drums fade, and drift into the wonder of a culture that sang of longing, not to silence it, but to honor it.